What if I told you that on a stretch of asphalt cutting through the heart of New Mexico, truck drivers refuse to drive alone after midnight? What if I told you that Highway 666, now renamed Highway 491 for reasons you'll soon understand, holds a secret so terrifying that the government tried to bury it by changing its very name? Tonight, I'm going to share with you the most documented case of supernatural encounters on American highways. A story so chilling, so consistently reported, that even the most skeptical investigators couldn't explain it away. But I need you to stay with me until the very end, because the truth behind this haunting will shake you to your core. Trust me, you won't regret hearing what really happened on that cursed road. Highway 66 earned its nickname, the Devil's Highway, long before the supernatural encounters began. Stretching 200 miles through the desolate landscapes of New Mexico, Utah, and Colorado, this road has claimed more lives per mile than almost any other highway in America. The locals always whispered about strange things happening along this route. Unexplained accidents, cars found wrapped around trees with no skid marks. Drivers discovered catatonic behind the wheel, unable to remember what happened. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared them for what started happening in the summer of 1978. Jake Morrison was a 15-year veteran trucker who'd driven every major highway from coast to coast. He'd seen it all, or so he thought. On July 15th, 1978, Jake was hauling a load of electronics from Albuquerque to Denver, taking Highway 66 because it was the fastest route. The clock on his dashboard read 11:47 p.m. when he first saw her. Standing on the side of the road, illuminated by his headlights, was a young woman in a wedding dress. But this wasn't the pristine white gown of a happy bride. The dress was torn, stained with something dark that looked like dried blood. Her long black hair hung in wet tangles around her face, and she was barefoot on the rough asphalt. Jake's first instinct was to keep driving. Nothing good happens when you pick up strangers on a highway at midnight. But something about her made him stop. Maybe it was the way she stood perfectly still, not even attempting to flag him down. Maybe it was how the desert wind didn't seem to move her hair or dress. Or maybe it was the fact that he could swear he saw her lips moving, as if she was speaking to someone who wasn't there. Against every instinct screaming in his head, Jake pulled over. The woman approached his truck slowly, deliberately. When she reached the passenger door, she looked up at Jake with eyes that seemed too old for her young face. She couldn't have been more than 25, but those eyes had seen things that aged souls beyond their years. "I need to get to St. Mary's," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The wedding. I'm late for the wedding." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Something was wrong with this picture, but he couldn't put his finger on what. "Where's St. Mary's, miss? I'm headed north on 666. "It's on the way," she replied, climbing into the cab without waiting for his answer. "Just keep driving. I'll tell you when to stop." As Jake shifted into gear, he glanced at his passenger. Up close, he could see that the stains on her dress definitely looked like blood, old blood. And there was something else, a smell. Not perfume, not the scent of soap or shampoo you'd expect from a bride. It was the smell of earth. Wet earth, like she'd been buried. For the first 10 miles, they drove in silence. Jake kept stealing glances at his passenger, and each time he looked, he noticed something new that made his skin crawl. Her feet weren't just dirty, they were cut and bleeding, leaving dark spots on his floor mat. Her fingers, which she kept clasped in her lap, were also bloody, as if she'd been clawing at something. Finally, Jake couldn't stand the silence anymore. "So, getting married tonight?" he asked, trying to keep his voice casual. The woman turned to look at him, and Jake immediately regretted asking. Her eyes weren't just old, they were hollow, empty, like looking into an abandoned well. "I was supposed to be married today," she said. "July 15th, 1978. But something went wrong. Something went very, very wrong." Jake's blood turned to ice. Today was July 15th, 1978. But the way she said it, like she was talking about a distant memory rather than something happening right now, it made no sense. "What went wrong?" Jake heard himself ask, though every instinct told him he didn't want to know the answer. The woman smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was the kind of smile that belongs in nightmares. "He killed me, Jake, right before I walked down the aisle. Shot me 3 times in the chest and left me to die in the church basement." Jake's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. He hadn't told her his name. He was certain he hadn't told her his name. "How do you know my name?" Jake managed to whisper. "I know a lot of things, Jake Morrison. Born February 3rd, 1943, in Tucson, Arizona. Married to Sarah for 12 years. 2 children, Tommy, age 8, and Lisa, age 6. You're wondering if you'll ever see them again." Jake's heart hammered against his ribs. None of this information was anywhere on his truck, his license, or his CB radio handle. There was no way this woman could know these things. "Who are you?" he asked, though he was beginning to suspect he didn't want that answer either. "My name is Maria Elena Vasquez. I was 24 years old when I died. I was going to marry Carlos Mendoza at St. Mary's Catholic Church on Highway 666, mile marker 78. But Carlos had been seeing another woman. He didn't want to divorce me after the wedding. That would have cost him money. So he decided to make sure the wedding never happened." Jake's mind raced. Mile marker 78 was coming up in about 15 miles, but he'd driven this route dozens of times, and he'd never seen a church at mile marker 78. Nothing but desert and scrub brush. "The church burned down," Maria continued, as if reading his thoughts. "August 1st, 1978. 17 days after my murder. They said it was an electrical fire, but I know better. Carlos burned it down to hide the evidence. My body was still in the basement." As they approached mile marker 78, Jake could see nothing but empty desert on both sides of the highway. No church, no ruins, nothing but endless darkness stretching toward the horizon. "Stop here," Maria said suddenly. "There's nothing here," Jake protested. "No church, no building, nothing. Stop the truck, Jake." Something in her voice made Jake obey. He pulled over to the shoulder and put the truck in park. The headlights illuminated nothing but sand and scattered rocks. Maria turned to face him fully, and Jake saw something that made his blood freeze. Her wedding dress wasn't just stained with blood. There were 3 holes in the fabric over her chest, bullet holes, and through those holes, Jake could see nothing, just darkness where her chest should have been. "Thank you for the ride, Jake. You're a good man, not like Carlos." She opened the passenger door and stepped down onto the highway. As soon as her feet touched the asphalt, Jake heard something that made his hair stand on end. Church bells. Faint, distant, but unmistakably the sound of wedding bells ringing in celebration. "Wait!" Jake called out, but when he looked toward the passenger side, Maria was gone. Completely gone. Jake Morrison never spoke publicly about what happened that night until 1995, when a paranormal investigator named Dr. Rebecca Santos tracked him down. By then, Jake had learned some disturbing facts about his encounter. St. Mary's Catholic Church had indeed existed at mile marker 78 on Highway 666. Built in 1952, It served the small Hispanic community that lived in the area. On July 15, 1978, a young woman named Maria Elena Vasquez was found murdered in the church basement, shot 3 times in the chest. She was wearing her wedding dress. Her fiancé, Carlos Mendoza, had disappeared the night before the wedding. He was never found, never arrested, never brought to justice for Maria's murder. The case went cold within 6 months. On August 1st, 1978, exactly 17 days after Maria's murder, St. Mary's Catholic Church burned to the ground in what investigators called an electrical fire of unknown origin. Maria's body, which had been kept in the church basement due to complications with the investigation, was cremated in the blaze. She was never properly buried, never given the funeral she deserved. But Jake Morrison wasn't the only trucker to encounter Maria Elena Vasquez on Highway 666. Dr. Santos spent 3 years investigating the Highway 666 phenomena, and what she discovered was both fascinating and terrifying. Between 1978 and 1995, she documented 47 separate encounters with the Highway 666 bride. Every encounter followed the same pattern. The sighting always occurred between 11:30 p.m. and 12:30 a.m., always on or near the anniversary of Maria's death, July 15th. The witness was always a truck driver, always driving alone. Maria always wore the same bloodstained wedding dress. She always asked to go to St. Mary's. She always knew personal information about the driver that she couldn't possibly have known. She always disappeared when the truck reached mile marker 78. But Dr. Santos discovered something else, something that made this case unique among paranormal encounters. Of the 47 documented encounters, only 12 drivers ever reported their experience to anyone official. The other 35 were discovered through Dr. Santos's private investigation. She found them by checking truck stop logs, CB radio transcripts, and interviewing drivers who'd stopped driving the Highway 666 route altogether. What she found was a community of terrified truckers who'd made a pact of silence about their encounters. They were afraid, not just of being ridiculed, but of something else, something Maria had told each of them. Every driver reported that Maria had whispered something to them just before disappearing, something that made them never want to drive Highway 666 alone again. Dr. Santos spent months convincing these men to tell her what Maria had said. Finally, one of them broke down and revealed the truth. "She told me about Carlos," said driver Robert Chen, who encountered Maria in 1983. "She said he never left New Mexico, never left Highway 666. She said he's still out there, still driving, still running from what he did. And she said that one night, when the conditions are just right, she's going to be waiting for him." Other drivers confirmed the same message. Maria wasn't just hitchhiking aimlessly, she was hunting. Every ride she caught, every driver she encountered, was part of her search for the man who murdered her and burned down her church. "She described his truck to me," said driver Amanda Wells, one of only 3 female truckers to encounter Maria. A 1975 Peterbilt, dark blue, with a dent in the front bumper from where he hit a deer in 1977. She knew everything about that truck, down to the crack in the windshield and the CB radio call sign he used, Desert Fox. Dr. Santos began searching motor vehicle records for Carlos Mendoza. What she found sent chills down her spine. Carlos Mendoza had indeed owned a 1975 Peterbilt truck, registered in his name until August 1978, just after the church fire. But here's where the story gets truly terrifying. Carlos never sold the truck. He never transferred the registration. According to official records, Carlos Mendoza died on August 15, 1978, in a single-vehicle accident on Highway 666, mile marker 78. His truck was found wrapped around a tree that, according to botanists, had died years earlier. But here's the part that made Dr. Santos question everything she thought she knew about the supernatural. There was no body in the truck. The police report stated that the truck was found with the engine still running, the driver's door open, and blood on the seat and steering wheel. But Carlos Mendoza's body was never recovered. The case was classified as a probable fatality, but without a body, it could never be officially closed. Dr. Santos published her research in 1996, and the Highway 66 encounters seemed to stop. For years, truckers drove the route without incident. The highway was even renumbered to Highway 491 in 2003, partly due to the negative associations with the number 666. But on July 15, 2003, the 25th anniversary of Maria's murder, something happened that changed everything. Trucker Dennis Rodriguez was driving southbound on the newly renamed Highway 491 when he saw two figures standing beside the road at mile marker 78. A woman in a blood-stained wedding dress, and a man in a dirty flannel shirt standing beside a dark blue Peterbilt truck. Dennis stopped, though he couldn't explain why. The woman approached his truck, and he immediately recognized her from the descriptions he'd heard. Maria Elena Vasquez, the Highway 66 bride. But this time, she wasn't asking for a ride. "Thank you," she said simply. "I found him." Dennis looked past her to the man standing by the blue truck. The man's face was twisted with fear, his mouth open in a silent scream. He seemed to be trying to run, but his feet wouldn't move. He was trapped, held in place by some invisible force. "Carlos Mendoza," Maria said, following Dennis's gaze. "He's been driving this highway for 25 years, never able to leave, never able to rest. But tonight, we're both going home." Maria walked back to Carlos, took his hand, and began leading him away from the road. As they walked into the desert, they began to fade, becoming transparent, then translucent, then gone. The blue Peterbilt truck remained by the roadside for exactly 17 minutes. Dennis timed it on his dashboard clock before it too faded away into nothing. Since that night in 2003, there have been no confirmed sightings of Maria Elena Vasquez on Highway 491. The haunting that terrorized truckers for 25 years simply ended. But the story doesn't end there. In 2004, construction workers building a rest stop at mile marker 78 made a discovery that sent shockwaves through the paranormal investigation community. Buried 3 feet beneath the desert sand, they found the charred foundation stones of an old building. Archaeologists confirmed that the stones were from St. Mary's Catholic Church. But that wasn't the most shocking discovery. In the center of the foundation, workers found 2 sets of human remains. A young woman wearing the remains of a wedding dress and a man in a flannel shirt. DNA testing confirmed the woman's identity as Maria Elena Vasquez. The man's remains were identified as Carlos Mendoza. Both had died from gunshot wounds. But here's what made investigators' blood run cold. The ballistics report showed that all the bullets, the 3 that killed Maria and the single shot that killed Carlos, came from the same gun, Carlos's gun. Somehow, 25 years after murdering his fiancée, Carlos Mendoza had been forced to turn his own weapon on himself. As we reach the end of this tale, you might wonder if any of this could possibly be true. Could a murdered bride really hitchhike a deserted highway for 25 years, searching for her killer? Could a guilty man be condemned to drive the same road for decades, unable to escape his crime? The New Mexico Department of Transportation has officially stated that the Highway 66 encounters were urban legends with no basis in fact. The paranormal investigation community remains divided. Skeptics point to the lack of physical evidence and the similarity between accounts as proof of mass hysteria or copycat stories. But I want you to consider this. Highway 491, the road formerly known as Highway 666, has had 0 supernatural encounters reported since 2003. After 25 years of consistent, documented sightings, they simply stopped. The night Maria and Carlos disappeared into the desert together was the last time anyone ever saw the Highway 66 bride. That's not the pattern of an urban legend. That's not how mass hysteria works. That's the pattern of a haunting that found its resolution. Maria Elena Vasquez got her justice. Carlos Mendoza paid for his crime. And somewhere in the desert of New Mexico, 2 souls who were bound together by violence finally found their peace. The next time you're driving alone on a dark highway at midnight and you see someone standing by the side of the road, remember Maria's story. Remember that sometimes the dead don't rest until justice is served. And sometimes justice takes 25 years and the help of 47 kind-hearted truckers who were willing to give a bride a ride to her wedding. Some say that on quiet nights, when the desert wind is still, you can sometimes hear the sound of church bells ringing at mile marker 78 on Highway 491. Wedding bells, finally celebrating a ceremony that was 25 years overdue. Thank you for staying with me until the end. The truth about Highway 666 was worth the wait, wasn't it?
Yeah.